Hello, everyone. You're listening to a podcast called The Earful Tower. That is a play on words, the Eiffel Tower, but for your ears. Why am I explaining the name of the show? Why? Because this is an episode aimed towards new listeners and people who are new to Paris. It's kind of weird. This show has been around for 350-ish episodes for about 6 years. There's been millions of downloads, and yet I don't think I've ever done an episode specifically geared towards first-time visitors. I'll explain a little bit later why I was what the sort of brainwave moment or the light bulb moment that made me want to go back to the beginning like this. But first, here's what you're in for in this episode. The first half is going to be me explaining the tips I would give to like a close friend or a loved one who was about to come to Paris for the first time. So these are my legitimate, true tips that I'd give to someone. The second part will be a checklist. The same checklist I'd give to someone, a friend, but it's specifically geared towards monuments and museums and stuff like that for your first time. Now, if it's your first time listening to this show, this is a perfect place to jump in. If you've listened a bunch of times before, I still think there'll be something in there for you, but this could be the episode that you share to a friend to get them into this podcast. Are you ready? Are you excited? You should be. You got your first trip to Paris coming up. Let's get started with some music from Press Maxim. Here we go. So I had a few emails over the past couple of weeks asking what that very song was. It's called Red Scooter by Prez Maxim, the musician, our house musician. And you can find him on Spotify, some of his older stuff. But that song was just written for the podcast, so you can't find it anywhere else, at least not for now. Let's talk about Paris. As I said, this first bit is going to be the things that I would tell a loved one. And I think it's really important to explain some of this stuff because I think a lot of people come to Paris treating it like a checklist for monuments and museums and things that you should see. And I think that's a mistake because one of the reasons Paris is so beloved and so famous and so good, and France as well, of course, is the culture. And those cultural things are kind of hard to list out on a sort of, when you go into Paris for the first time, you should do this. But whether it's hard or not, I've done it. And these few things are what I reckon you should do on your first trip to Paris. But first, I want to get a few important things out of the way, things that a lot of people wonder and think about before they're coming. And I've come up with a pretty easy way to answer them both. The first is, where should you stay? Assuming you're on a really small budget, that's easy. You should stay wherever you can afford. It doesn't matter. If you're really, really trying to save money, stay as far out as you need to. It's impossible to recommend an area. Essentially, you just stay as close as you can. And that's the same advice I'd give to anyone who's got a bit more of a budget for accommodation, is you should stay as central as you can. It's not a big city compared to like LA or Sydney or whatever, but if you want to walk a lot, you want to stay central. So they made it easy. There's 20 districts, arrondissements, ordered from 1 to 20. 1 is very central. And I'd say, if you can, stay between 1 and 6. That way you'll be right in the middle of the town. You can kind of walk to anything that you're going to need. Then the sort of next level will be 7 to 11. They're still pretty close to being central. There's still a lot going on. They're still excellent, but they're sort of one step out in this spiraling loop. And then I'd say anything from 12 to 20, you've got a chance that you're literally going to be staying on the edge of the ring road. So look on the map. Any address has the arrondissement in it. If the address ends in 75006, you're in the 6th arrondissement. 75012, you're in the 12th arrondissement. It's that simple. So it really is worth splashing out a little bit on your hotel or your accommodation. And if that means take one fewer day in Paris so that you can stay in a little bit of a better area, it's worth it as far as I'm concerned. Especially for your first trip. The other thing that people often get wrong and often write in to ask about is getting into town. There's two options there's two options to get in from the airport. The first is the cheapest one. It is the train, and it's pretty well signed out, and it costs about 12 euros. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the worst way to get into town, because if you got a lot of luggage, and if you're hoping for a really beautiful, romantic, Parisian experience, you're not going to get it on the trains. Especially if you're coming in really late at night, you don't know who will also be on that train. And while I think Paris is a safe city, you're not, you're not putting the odds in your favor of a pleasant start to the trip by jumping in a train with your whole family and trying to figure out tickets and so on. What you should do is take a taxi, if you can afford it, of course. But if you're, two or more people, you might even be saving money on those taxis. Here's why. The taxis have fixed fares from the airports into the city. And I actually took a taxi from an airport really recently, and I took a photo of it just to read it out to you. If you're in the Charles de Gaulle airport, which is also called the Roissy airport, Roissy, it looks like, it's 53 euros to go to the right bank and 58 euros for the left bank. So it doesn't matter where you're staying on either side of the river. It's a fixed rate. It's so easy, fixed rate. And if you're coming in from Orly, it's even cheaper. It's 37 euros to go to the right bank, 32 to the left bank. Now, when I took this airport cab the other day, I specifically tried to look at it with new eyes, and I found it to be really, really easy. There's a big sign at the front saying, "A licensed taxi always has a neon sign." Then there were like huge circular stickers on the ground with the word taxi and footprints that I followed all the way to a big sign explaining that it's flat rates. And then it was just a matter of telling the guy there which side of the river I was going to. That's how easy it was. And then when I got to my apartment, they always want cash. Every taxi driver wants cash. I didn't have any. And I just said, before he even had a chance, I just said, "I'll pay by card." He said, "Oh, you don't have cash, do you?" And I said, "Nope." I said, "I've been in Sweden. They don't even have euros over there. What do you want from me?" I didn't actually say that. Although sometimes I think if you get away with a little bit of banter with these guys, they kind of like it. But don't ever feel that you need to pay by cash, especially if you're doing any kind of decent journey, because I think by law they should all have card machines. I know it can be a bit sort of daunting, these taxis, and I didn't intend to talk about it for so long, but I do hear of a lot of people getting ripped off. What I'd say is, if you're really afraid of getting ripped off by these rogue taxi drivers, take an Uber. I take Ubers all the time. They're perfectly safe, and you've even got the driver's number in case you leave something behind. Or there's a website called G7 where you can pre-book and prepay your taxi ride. And as a third alternative, if you are going to hail a taxi down on the street or whatever, use the Uber app to see how much the ride should cost, so you got a fair idea. And as a kind of rule of thumb, any ride within the city shouldn't be more than about 30 euros. So if you see some meter ticking up extremely high, stop, get out, I don't know, do whatever you need to do. It's never happened to me, but I know that it does happen. All right. Those are the two sort of important things just to get out of the way. All this will be on the blog, theeiffeltower.com. But now onto some fun things that I think you should have on your bucket list. Ways to experience the culture of Paris. Things you should do on your first trip here. And I'm going to try and get out of this this warning vibe here, because a lot of this stuff is really fun. One thing, and maybe the first thing you should do when you get here, is seek out a boulangerie, a baker's shop, a pâtisserie. One of the ones that seems to have about 150 different types of pastry on display. Go in there, buy a croissant. You can buy anything you want if you're feeling daring, but just get a croissant. Go and find some park bench, sit down and eat it. And I feel like I could confidently guarantee that croissant will be, and the taste of it and the enjoyment that you'll probably get from it is much more likely to be a story that you'll tell your friend or your family when you get back home, compared to climbing the Eiffel Tower or visiting Notre Dame, which those things are going to come up as well. But like, I don't know, if you're in, I said LA before, let's say you're in LA, you come back, you go to some typical cafe, you get some disgusting kind of croissant. That's where you turn to your friend and you say, if only I could be back in Paris. I went into this pastry shop where they must have had 200 different types of pastries. It was like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. I took a croissant, and when I bit into it, it was like a dream come true. Oh, nothing will ever beat that croissant that morning in the 7th arrondissement of Paris. I promise you, that's what it's like. And I think people miss out on doing this by either like just getting the croissant or whatever from their hotel, which doesn't necessarily mean it's a good one, or getting it from a supermarket or some like kind of lame pastry shop. How do you know which is a good one? Just glance in the window. If it looks amazing, I bet it tastes amazing. Similar kind of vein, when you're in Paris, talking about restaurants, go to a terrace. This is a really easy one. A terrace just means like the outside seating. Get a coffee. There's a very good chance it will be a disgusting coffee. I know people say that I'm a snob when it comes to this, but I'm not. I think value of money for 4 or 5 euros, getting a delicious flat white or a cappuccino is kind of the cheapest pleasure you can get in a big city. And, maybe even a step beyond that. If you get like a €1 disgusting espresso on a beautiful terrace and just patiently sit, watch the city go by, people watching in Paris, that is a must do. You can do it by yourself, do it before everyone else wakes up, and you'll have a true Parisian moment. And it doesn't matter where it is. It doesn't matter what the coffee tastes like. Just look for that classic Paris place and enjoy it like that. And that comes with a little caveat. Whenever you're going to eat anything in Paris, if you're a foodie, you don't need to listen to me. You can go find your restaurants that you know that you're looking for. But for first-timers, be really careful about choosing restaurants when you're hungry near tourist sites. Because the food, like think about the restaurant that's 5 steps away from the Eiffel Tower is probably paying the most incredible rent that you can imagine. So of course they're going to have extremely expensive, overpriced food. And of course they're going to try and cut costs. So like the food in the city is typically so good that if you think ahead and you eat near your hotel or on the way or whatever, you'll save yourself a lot of money and probably a bad experience. Like you get away from a bad experience, because if you eat out near the Eiffel Tower or if you have a pint of beer or whatever, it's like double the price and half as good. So think before you eat. Don't get hungry and eat in a touristy place. It's just a waste of money. And, you see all these bad reviews of waiters and stuff in Paris. I think that's all from those places that are just swarming with tourists who are just, flooding through, and everybody's sort of bored and tired, and you're sort of shooting yourself in your foot before you even get in. Extra tip. When you're in a restaurant, try to avoid the food that you typically have back home. All the Parisian restaurants serve hamburgers, cheeseburgers, but you've had that before. Try something that you've heard of from France, like a croque monsieur or an onion soup à l'oignon. Or one of the things I get very often when I'm out with my wife, especially 2 people, a planche mixte. A planche mixte. And that means a planche is like a chopping board sort of, and mixed means a mix of cheese and meats, and even a bad one is still probably a lot better than you get in most of the other countries around the world. So order a planche mixte. Usually it's maybe €20, and it will be a dinner for 2 people. There you go. A few other obvious things, obvious to me, but maybe not for first timers. If you see some kind of gambling game on the streets, people offering big prizes for seemingly really easy games, like you've seen them before, like a ball under a cup or card games or whatever, it is a scam. You're not going to win. Just think, do you really think that you're going to win €100 from 3 dudes on the street? You're never going to win it. Why would they ever give you €100? It's all a trick, and I find it really fascinating. I feel so sorry for people that fall for it, especially in the touristy areas around the Eiffel Tower or Montmartre. But it's fascinating. If you stop and watch them for 5 minutes, you'll see they've got like 10 people in on it. People who are giving their own money and pretending to lose it. About 10 meters away, they've got their eyes who are looking out for the cops. Then they've got people who are picking your pockets as well. When you see those games, just walk away. Or if you see people trying to tell you you've lost something or get you to sign a petition for deaf people, or if they try and tie something to your wrist, you don't even have to be polite. They're not being polite to you. Just say no, thank you, and walk away. And if you really want to watch, like I do sometimes, those gambling games on the street, be careful about your wallet. You don't want to get pickpocketed while you're watching scams going on. That's the worst that could happen. Now, enough of the warnings. Another thing is tipping. I hear about tipping a lot. I would say it's pretty easy. Tip if you want to tip. You don't have to. No one's expecting it. If you feel like you're getting really good service, just put down some money, I guess. I've talked to people on all sides of this, and essentially waiters in France and in Paris are getting a livable wage. So it's not like in America where they absolutely rely on it. But then when we did that episode with Edward Chisholm, the waiter in Paris episode, he explained how vital it was for people to be tipped. So if you've got the money to do it, do it. Why not? 10%, 20%, go for it. Even if you just have a little coffee and just leave some extra coins, it's very appreciated. 2 more things here. Be polite. Sounds really obvious, but it needs to be said. If you're too nervous to say bonjour, I don't care. You gotta say it. Bonjour. Repeat after me no matter where you are, especially if you're in public, especially if you're jogging. I know a lot of people listen to this while they're jogging, so this is perfect. Bonjour. Bonjour. It's not bonjour or bonjour. Bonjour. Say it as you walk in. Say it politely and pleasantly. Bonjour. And then just switch to English. I think the worst you can do is do like a dumbed down version of your own English in the anticipation that the person might not speak English. I think that's really impolite. Like if you walk in and say, 2, dinner, 2, table for 2, and lift up 2 fingers. I think that's even worse. Go in and say, bonjour, a table for 2, please. You're sorted. The last thing I want to talk about before we get into the sort of monument checklist and the reasons why I'm doing this episode is consider doing a private walking tour. You can do it with, I've had loads of tour guides on this show before, and they're great. You can seek them out. Otherwise, I'd recommend you do an Eiffel Tower walking tour. We've been doing them over the past 6 months or so. There's 3 of us that are doing them, and they're kind of discovery tours. The idea is to introduce you to the Marais, Montmartre, 7th arrondissement, or the islands, those 2 islands in the middle of the Seine. If you value your time, if you want to get the lay of the land and see sort of fun stories and the kind of secret courtyards that I talk about on the show and the famous things, a mix of sort of the famous and the secret, then do a tour like the Eiffel Tower walking tour. I personally don't have much time for the deeply historical sort of scripted tours that sound like the guide is reading out the Wikipedia page about the deceased kings and the history of the buildings and stuff. That's not really for me. So when I scripted these tours, I tried to make them more fun and engaging, entertaining even. So check them out. We've been doing them to really good reviews for people from around the world, and I'll be publishing a page about it. Before I publish the page, send me an email and we'll work something out. You'll find me at contact@theeiffeltower.com. Now, let's have a little bit more music from Press Maxon before we get into the second half of this episode. Thank you, Prez Maxon. The second half of this podcast episode, hope I'm not scaring you off at all. I'm rather trying to do the opposite, get you here ready to go. This second part of it is the checklist that I'm going to publish on the eiffeltower.com. And before I get into this checklist, I want to explain why I'm winding things back after 350 episodes. Is because the last episode I did about the bucket lists, I had a realization that my taste in Paris, after doing 6 years worth of podcasting, is getting very niche. And I find that really exciting. I know there are a lot of people out there that are sort of maybe even equally excited about these things I find in Paris. But I also realize that as I keep doing these episodes and digging deeper and deeper into Paris, I realized that it might be a little bit alienating for new people. Don't fear all you people who've been listening forever and who like the digging around stuff. I'm never going to stop doing that. But I'm also very aware that someone who sort of decides to listen to this show and finds me getting excited about going under a post office to find where a river once went through a wall, I realize that's maybe too nerdy for some people. So I want to wind it back and do a few things for first-time visitors as well, because always at the heart of everything I do, I want this to keep growing and see where we can take it. And alienating people is never going to be the way to do that. So, with that in mind, I'm going to launch this very week on the website, theearfultower.com, tips for the first trip to Paris as a checklist, a really easily, even print-outable if you want, checklist where the people who have never been can pin it on their wall and plan around it. The people who've been a few times can look at it and be excited to tick everything off. But I'm going to do 10 blog episodes. It's not going to be on the podcast after this, but it's going to be second trip to Paris, third trip to Paris until, well, either until you guys lose interest or I run out of ideas. But the idea would be that if we get all the way to the 10th trip to Paris, it'll be really offbeat, unusual things that'll help everybody plan and give everyone a chance to dream if you've got no Paris trips coming up. On to the checklist. There was something really interesting about Paris when I sort of started to think about the absolute must-dos on a first trip to Paris, is that this is the most visited tourist site in the world as a city, Paris, with the most visited monuments in the world. And I thought it would probably be obvious what everyone would pick, but I was hugely surprised. I asked the members, the Patreon members of this show, I'll read what I asked them to you. I said, I'm working on an idea. Can you guys write in the comments 5 things in Paris that a first-time visitor should not miss? I want them to be obvious. It can be cafes, restaurants, museums, areas. Just write 5 things. And I said that I wouldn't accept any obscure things, right? There were 70 people who responded. And when I put it there, I was kind of expecting all, let's say, 70 responses to be more or less exactly the same. But get this, there weren't just a total of 5 different things that came in, as in 5 different things from all these 70 people. There were 70 different things. Can you imagine that? You might think the Eiffel Tower, the most famous building in the world perhaps, would be on everyone's list. There were 20% of these people didn't even mention the Eiffel Tower. Think about how crazy that is. Recommending what to do on the first trip to Paris. These 70 Patreon supporters who I would consider to be somewhat experts. You know, most of them have enough of a deep love of Paris to listen to this podcast and become a Patreon member. 20% of them didn't even recommend the Eiffel Tower. So I took all that into account in planning out my list, and here's what I think you should do. Remembering this is probably for like 4 or 5 day trip. I'd say you have to do the Eiffel Tower. You have to do it. You can go and look at it, but people will ask, just climb up it. There's no shortcuts, really. You can skip the line as the best you can do, but just get there early one morning, get it over and done with, and tick it off the list. Now, long-time listeners know I'm not a ticket off the list kind of guy, but in this case, and the next couple of things, tick it off the list. The other thing, similar vein, Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe. A lot of Parisians, same as the Eiffel Tower, a lot of Parisians will never go there. The Champs-Élysées is really touristy. It's historical and it's quite beautiful and it's very famous, but it's not really where you want to go for a stroll to see Paris. But again, you have to see it. If I was talking to a family member and they said, oh, I really want to see the Champs-Élysées and the Arc de Triomphe, I'd say, okay, find a way to get halfway down towards the Arc, walk up to the Arc, take a picture, you're done. I wouldn't even suggest going shopping there unless you're really into shopping. It's just too crowded. Just get in, get out. Same thing with Notre Dame and the islands. I think Notre Dame, especially because it's closed probably until 2024 after the fire, You just need to go and have a look at it, check in on how it's looking. You can't even get too close to it, but just sort of get up there, tick it off, and spend at least half an hour walking around the nearby area. There's 2 islands. It's on the Île de la Cité. I would personally walk straight across to the Île Saint-Louis, which is one of my favorite places in Paris. At least 10 minutes, and you get a good idea. If you've got some extra time, I don't know, maybe spend an hour there, but just get a look, think to come back another time. Next, the Seine is an obvious one. A lot of people mentioned the Seine in the members group, and I hadn't even thought about it, but a lot of people recommended doing a river cruise, and it is a really good idea. 15 euros, often very busy. Doesn't matter which company that you do, they're all kind of the same. They all see the same things, and you get an idea of Paris from a different angle. You get to see a lot of the famous things, and it only takes about an hour. All these things you could probably do in an hour, so that might help to plan a little bit. The next one, though, the Louvre. This is kind of controversial. Because it's a first-time visit and it's a checklist, and I want you to enjoy your trip, I have no problem with you going to the Louvre just to see the Mona Lisa. You can get in there. I mean, you'll see other things as you walk towards it. You'll probably walk past the beautiful winged Victory of Samothrace. You'll probably go down to the astonishing, gobsmacking Philippe Auguste foundations, the wall at the bottom. But you don't have to. If you're just about seeing something quickly and moving on, there are signs in there saying Louvre, saying Mona Lisa this way. So just, you can even, when you get there, if it was me, I'd just walk past it from a distance. But you can even line up again and get a little bit closer. But as I've said on this podcast before, you're not going to go home and brag to your friends about seeing the Mona Lisa. It's much more likely that you talk about something else in the Louvre. Save the Louvre true exploration for another visit, because you could spend a whole day there and find just jaw-dropping stuff in there. Now, I also wanted to pick a neighborhood, and it was hard to pick between the Marais and Montmartre, but I chose the Marais for the first. That gives you a clue for what's coming for the second blog post. But the Marais, if you've never heard of it before, it's the 3rd and 4th arrondissement. Very old, very, very old Paris, like 400-year-old squares like the Place des Vosges, old hôtels particuliers like townhouses. Really perfect for strolling. I wouldn't even go there with too many destinations. I just walk around and get the vibe. Or if you, like I said before, if you value your time, do an Eiffel Tower walking tour where the risk of wandering around too much, as lovely as it is you might walk on every parallel street to a fascinating and amazing street. And a tour guide will know the right ones to take you down. If you're saving money though, just walk around the Marais. Lastly, I wanted to throw a park in there, and I'd recommend the Luxembourg Gardens on the left bank. Surely the prettiest park in Paris, maybe in Europe. Just really a lot going on there. You can get the gist of the Luxembourg in 20 minutes, but you could easily spend a whole afternoon there. There's a lot going on the further you walk. There's I think most people just go and see the pond and the fountain, the Medici fountain, but there's way more. You maybe remember I played chess in a back corner there. There's beekeepers in another corner. There's vineyards. I don't know if vineyards, orchards maybe is the word. They're growing apples. Loads of things to see in there, and a lot of history as well. So that winds up the checklist. I'll make it really shareable, put it on social media, not least since I saw how viral the 50 Things to Do in Paris post went last week. But if you haven't already, check out the website, theeiffeltower.com, if nothing else, to encourage me to make the next 9 blog posts. I'd like to make 10 of them. So, 10 things to do on your second trip to Paris, third trip to Paris, and share them around. If you're an expert, I expect you to be doing the sharing. And if you're new, all I ask is that you enjoy the show. Lastly, if you find value in all this stuff and you want to see it thrive, you want to see it succeed, you want to see it get better, I mentioned Patreon a couple times earlier in the episode. That is how this show exists, and not least exists without huge adverts all over the place. There aren't any adverts. So if you go on patreon.com/the Eiffel Tower, you can sign up. You can actually sign up for whatever you want. You can sign up for $1 a month if you want. You can make custom pledges. You can do $100 a month if you want. But I recommend $10 each month, and that gets you access to pretty much everything, including the PDF guide that we made to this city, which is about 100 pages of really recently refreshed stuff. I went and visited it all, and it all comes with hand on my heart recommendations. This is all stuff that I paid to see. This isn't like, I'm not going to name names, but on your bookshelf, even in bookstores, some of those guides are years old, and the people that write them, they just go and glance at everything and often get it for free. This is legit. The Eiffel Tower's PDF Guide to Paris. You can find it on theeiffeltower.com/guide, or get it free when you sign up on Patreon. So, if you are a member, I want to just do a quick shout out to Sunday night. I'm going to be doing the first ever Pick My Paris Brain, where people have been sending in questions for it's kind of like a seminar, really. People have been sending in questions, but it's going to be more of a live thing, and people are going to say, Oliver, is it true that the Train Bleu restaurant is overrated? And I'll tell the truth. That's the whole idea. And I'll help you plan your upcoming trip. So check that out too. Otherwise, if you're not interested in spending any money on any of this stuff, follow along on social media and tell your friends. That stuff helps incredibly much for me too. This will do for me. My name is Oliver G, and this is the Eiffel Tower Podcast. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you again next week for another new episode about your favorite city in France. Until then, merci beaucoup, and au revoir.